section 3 of Paul on assignment. We saw yesterday that Paul had found a very clever way to get the attention of the Greek people, and so he got himself an invitation to the Areopagus, the highest court in the land. The Areopagus is actually a hill outside of Athens, and that's where the court used to meet, but the name has since become to mean the court itself. Now, I said yesterday that Paul focused on the resurrection of Jesus because the Greeks did not believe in resurrection. In fact, when that court was originally opened and dedicated, there was a play held, and in that play it stated quite clearly that a man dies never to return. And so the whole court was based on the notion of no resurrection. From the Areopagus, you look straight out across to the Parthenon on top of the Acropolis. The Parthenon was the temple to Athena, and she was the goddess of wisdom. And the Greek mindset was that human mind was the way to find ultimate truth. And so the worship of Athena was paramount. Paul wanted to change their mindset, the power of human intellect, and he wanted to change it to one of finding truth God's way. He writes that later in Romans. He says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." So how did Paul go about trying to change their mindset? The first thing he did was he began to talk in terms they would understand, things that were familiar to them. He began speaking to the Areopagus, saying, "I see you are a very religious people." Now that says, "I've been looking around your city and I can see that this is most important to you." He doesn't jump straight in trying to impose Hebrew way of thinking onto them. In fact, he started with their devotion to their gods. And he said, "But I see you have an altar to the unknown God. Let me tell you about him." It's interesting to think that that altar may have been to the Jewish God, because to the Greek mind, the God of the Jews would have been an absolute mystery. He had no statues, no temples. Who was this God? So maybe the altar was to this God that they saw the Jewish people amongst them worshipping. We don't know that, but it's an interesting thought. So Paul said something that they all knew about. And then he began telling them about this unknown God, that he was the God of the universe. He was the creator of heaven and earth. He didn't live in temples that were made with human hands. That this God was the source of all life and the creator of all nations. Now, he doesn't quote any scripture verses, but everything he said was firmly based on scripture. Remembering that Paul was a highly trained Pharisee, and so the scriptures were just in his mind all the time, and he could just pull out the truths of scripture without having to quote verses to back it up. He simply spoke the truths. He did one clever thing, and he quoted two of their own sources. One of them, "In him we live and move and have our being." The other one, "We are his offspring." So what he was doing, he was tying their own teaching and their own philosophers and thinkers into this understanding of who God really was. God calls us to be his presence in our community. But if we want to bring people to know Jesus, we need to understand the culture of the people we're talking to, how they live, what matters to them, so that we can speak to them in terms that are meaningful and relevant. Our aim is the same as Paul, that people do not conform to the pattern of this world, but are transformed by the renewing of their minds.